A&M's Dr. Bruce Dixon is investigating the impact of heavy Allied bombing prior to the Rangers' mission. Beneath the surface, Dixon surveys structural damage caused by the bombing. The ruins of even these massively fortified ammunition magazines demonstrate the power of the Allied bombing.
My God, did this thing take a pasting? This really received severe damage. And I doubt if anybody who was in here survived. This arsenal, or this magazine, took a direct hit on the roof where the berm was, I think, and it lifted the entire roof up, and then it dropped back down, and that's where all this damage is, and that probably sprung the door.
It's clear to Dixon that defenses like this were just not strong enough for the Germans to be able to withstand the bombing.
I think they underestimated the force of the Allied invasion, or perhaps they simply were unable to expend the resources to make them strong enough. Here's the proof. They obviously didn't. They were reduced to pulp in the space of the bombing, keeping in mind that, 5 megatons of explosives were dropped here, or fired here, which is the equivalent of the amount dropped on Hiroshima in one single bombing. So perhaps the Germans could never have anticipated the amount of firepower that was going to be directed against them. But it's true, or it's clear, and again, it's clear in this tunnel, that they underbuilt.
The German defenses were built using inferior concrete and were not designed strongly enough to resist against unprecedented levels of Allied bombing, explaining to some extent how the Rangers and other Allied troops overcame the Atlantic Wall on D-Day. At Pointe Du Hoc, Simon True of Britain's Royal Military Academy picks up the story of the Rangers' assault.
The Rangers come ashore under fire from German machine gun positions on the cliff in the distance. Something like 15 Rangers are killed or wounded as they cross the beach, but most of them get to the base of the cliff. Some of them manage to come up the cliff using toggle ropes. Some of them carry prefabricated sections of ladders. So by about 5 minutes after landing, the first of the Rangers were actually coming over the tops of the cliffs at about a dozen points, stretching away into the distance from where I'm standing.
5 minutes from the landing craft to the 90-foot cliff top was extraordinarily fast. How was it that this was much more straightforward for the Rangers than their training climbs had been? Peter Doyle suspects geology may hold the answer. Allied aerial bombing and naval gunfire had a drastic effect on the strata of the cliff rocks.
At this point, the geology really favoured the Rangers, because at the top of the cliff are soft rocks, and those soft rocks, when they're bombarded, create the possibility of a slip. The rocks themselves slide off the harder rocks beneath, which creates a ramp towards the bottom of the cliff.
The ramp extended more than a third of the way up the cliff face, giving the Rangers a head start on their climb. One massive crater on the cliff edge created a sheltered hollow. It was here that Colonel Rudder set up his command post. But the lead Rangers had no need for orders. They immediately set off for the guns. But as they jumped down into the rubble-strewn gun emplacements, they found things were not as they'd been expecting.
As soon as they get into these positions, they find that the guns aren't actually here. Instead, what there are logs with underneath camouflage nets instead. So where are the guns?
The battle had taken a serious turn into the unexpected. How would the Rangers manage to complete their mission now? The layout of the heavily bombed Pointe Du Hoc position bore little resemblance to the maps the Rangers had been issued. But even worse, the Germans had removed the 6 heavy guns from their concrete emplacements.
A crucial fact about the Pointe Du Hoc battery is that the guns are wheeled, which was not true of all German batteries in the area. They're meant to sit in their concrete casemates to protect them, but if the shelling gets too intense or the bombing gets too intense or they're needed for another target, they can be taken out of those casemates and shifted to another location.
It was not what the Rangers were expecting. The unique qualities of their training would now be their greatest resource.
A critical feature of the mission really is the way in which the Rangers are trained to act on their own initiative. They don't rely on orders from Colonel Rudder, they don't even rely on orders from their first lieutenants very often. Rather, the technical sergeants, the first sergeants, are the men who are rallying small groups, 2 or 3, 4, 5 maybe individuals, and they go about their mission straight away. They don't need centralised orders. So it's a very rapid, very punchy, very high momentum operation.
These small teams of Rangers now pushed inland from the cliffs, patrolling forward to try and track down the missing guns. One group was led by First Sergeant Leonard Lommel.
And we didn't know where we were going. It was the only road there, and we saw these marks on the road, like wheel marks, and we thought, well, it's a farm wagon or something. Let's go see.
Lommel and just 2 other Rangers penetrated approximately half a mile inland, when they had to hide in a hedgerow from a large group of German soldiers. They could hardly believe their eyes when they looked on the other side of the hedgerow.
We came upon an apple orchard, and there were 5 of them. That was the alternate. We just lucked upon them, and there was nobody guarding them.
Lommel had found the guns. It was an amazing stroke of luck. The guns were drawn up ready to fire in the direction of the Allied landings at Utah Beach, 6 miles to the east. Lommel had to think fast. He had to try to destroy the guns. The problem was the overwhelming number of enemy troops nearby.
I said, Jack, you get up on the hedgerow and you, with your 45, and you protect me. If anybody turns around, they're only about 75 to 100 yards away, fire. That'll tip me off that they saw something.
Lommel and the others were carrying incendiary grenades. Somehow they used these to knock out the guns. Incredibly, the German crews did not notice. How was this possible? Were Lommel's actions just cloaked by the chaos of battle? Or was there another explanation? Simon West is a lieutenant colonel in Britain's Royal Artillery. As a gunner, he's intrigued as to how the Rangers were able to destroy heavy artillery pieces without detection. He's researched the type of incendiary grenade that the Rangers claim to have used. They were special munitions known as thermite grenades. Thermites were not filled with high explosive like conventional grenades and are no longer used today. They wreaked destruction in a different way from their modern counterparts. To find out more, West calls in explosives expert Nigel Davis of Britain's Royal Military College of Science.
Thermite is a material that's used to produce heat. All you do is take a powdered metal, aluminium, which is, when it burns in air, it creates a great amount of heat. You mix it then with an oxide of iron. Now, you don't think of iron oxide as being reactive, but it's got oxygen in it. If you mix the two together, the aluminium extracts the oxygen, almost burns in the mixture, and produces a tremendous amount of heat.
So it's quite finely ground, and this would be packed into the grenade. Mm-hmm. So all that energy being released, what's the product then?
The product is molten iron at some hundreds of degrees above its melting point. That
right, so it becomes a fluid.
It's liquid, it'll flow. We can make it flow around things so that you can gum things up. If you make it drip onto things, you can actually eat through metal with it.
Thermite did not blow the target apart. It welded it together. But the Pointe Du Hoc guns were huge. West believes there were vulnerable weak points that the Rangers were trained to identify. He points these out, using the carriage of a similar World War II artillery gun.
Now, if you're trying to disable a piece of equipment, you don't necessarily want to take on the equipment's strengths. Far better to look for a weak point. And in the case of an artillery gun, the mechanisms used to point it in the right direction are actually quite finely tuned and very vulnerable to attack. First of all, we've got a hand wheel which adjusts the traverse, and here we've got the elevating hand wheel which adjusts the angle of elevation.
To demonstrate the effect of thermite on vital working parts like these, West sets up an experiment. A heavy metal screw thread is used to represent an artillery gun's traversing gear. Davis measures out approximately the same amount of thermite as would have been contained in one of the Rangers' grenades. Even in the pouring rain, the effect is almost instantaneous. There is a massive release of energy which produces molten iron, but very little sound.
Am I going too close?
Don't touch it.
When the metal cools down, the thermite has fused the pieces of metal together.
I think what we can see, apart from this burning container that we used, get rid of that, underneath, while it's still red hot, a bit of slag on the top, but that's molten iron and it's welded the whole mechanism up. So it would seem, from the accounts, that it would be quite possible to do an attack like this without anyone knowing. In the confusion of the moment, a small thermite charge would have masses of effect, but not necessarily be noticed by anyone on the position.
Around 2 hours into the mission, the main objective had been achieved. The guns had not been destroyed, but they were inoperable. The Germans did not get the chance to fire the guns before they were disabled, so nobody ever knew for sure how much damage they could have caused if they had escaped discovery. Is it possible to find out now? Sergeant Lommel reported roughly where he and the others had found the guns, and that they were pointed ready to fire towards Utah Beach to the west. But in the chaos of the moment, no exact record of the gun's position was made. Military historian Simon True believes that if he can find out where the guns were, it will be possible to assess the damage they could have caused. First, he needs to get an understanding of the gun's scale and appearance. Preserved at Pointe Du Hoc is an amazing relic from the battle, thought to be the barrel of one of the actual guns. It gives True an impression of the gun's sheer size.
So this is a gun of the type that Sergeant Lommel and Sergeant Cohn found when they went down the track. It's a French Puteaux 1917 155mm gun. All of what we got here, of course, is the barrel and the breech mechanism. The gun in its entirety would have had a traversing mechanism, recoil mechanism, great trails, and of course wheeled carriage. But it's still a very bulky piece of ordnance, very difficult to move around and certainly difficult to conceal.
In 1944, there were 5 of these giant guns, hidden ready to fire at the Allied invasion fleet. But more than 60 years on, can Simon True find out exactly where? Simon True is trying to locate the exact position where German guns were discovered and neutralized by US Rangers on D-Day. At the time, Allied intelligence assumed the guns were still in their emplacements. They didn't suspect that the Germans had hidden them somewhere else. True met up with the Texas A&M team at Pointe Du Hoc. As part of their survey of the natural erosion of the clifftop site, they've also been recording its cratering by wartime bombing. Maybe the team can help True with his search.
You know, what we think is that they had to pull them out fairly early because the later bombing showed the site so riddled with holes and craters that it would be very difficult to get those guns out at that time.
Right.
Intense cratering would have been a major obstacle for the heavy guns, so they must have been moved before the site was too heavily bombed.
So they get them out of the positions, presumably, I don't know, using local farm animals or something like that, maybe?
Yeah, horse and cart.
Horse and cart, yeah. And then the logic is that they would have brought them down the exit road here inland, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay.
And then there's a report, of course, of them having gone out past the highway into some orchard area back, about a kilometer away?
Yes. About a kilometre from the casemates and the emplacements where the construction work is going on. Yeah.
The local terrain and field pattern have not changed since World War II.